Back live with you tonight, and thanks so much for staying on. South Africa's quarterly employment statistics reveal that the agricultural sector employs greater numbers, lifting many out of poverty. But at the same time, the persistent load shedding is not helping the sector to absorb these numbers due to the limited activity during power cuts. The impact of load shedding goes as far as logistics and processing operations, leading to the knock-on effect of high prices at the store shelves. Farmers are now calling on national government to consider subsidizing farmers with alternative energy sources. For more on this, we are now joined by the African Farmers Association of South Africa CEO Thandeka Mbassa. Good to have you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
I know I'm just touching broadly on the impact on logistics, on the processing operations, so on and so forth. But paint a picture for us and take us a little bit in terms of the farming operations and how, for example, does an indefinite state of stage 6 load shedding affect operations on the farms?
Okay, thank you. I cannot start talking on the question or responding to your question without mentioning the fact that the agricultural sector is still in the process of recovering from the impact of COVID-19 and other challenges that are related to climate change, variability, droughts, floods, and we have seen a lot of that in the KwaZulu-Natal, in fact in all provinces. So we're still in the process of trying to mitigate the impacts of all of that, and we have seen in the past the impact of back-to-back rises in fuel prices. That has also had an impact. But what we're experiencing with load shedding is quite huge. And by the way, we cannot only talk about the agricultural sector. We have to look at other sectors of the economy because there are clear linkages between. But let's focus on how we are experiencing load shedding. We have to look at the whole value chain, Thabo. Right from planting up to a point where we are either exporting or transporting the produce. The government has been very instrumental in assisting farmers to move. So obviously, right from the planting, energy is a very important input. And that is why we're saying every step of the way is affected by availability of electricity.
Now, the agricultural sector, as enormous as it is, with various commodity support groups and so on and so forth, has there been no conversation and collaboration, particularly in coming up with alternative ways of being able yourself, as the agricultural sector, to even further contribute towards electricity generation with the vast amounts of lands, for example, that you have?
Correct. Look, the current energy situation in the country is not likely to change in the nearest future. The government has just developed a very progressive plan that's supposed to, going forward, to make sure that there's growth. And I must say inclusive growth, because as a farmer, the majority of our farmers are those small farmers, even though we do have many farmers that are operating in the commercial space. So this plan has its own targets, and we are worried that we may not necessarily be able to meet the targets that have been set. We're seeing a huge impact in just the manner in which farmers have to operate. You're talking about mitigation. Farmers have come up with ways of, for instance, let me make an example of irrigation. You know that irrigation requires energy. Now you see farmers having to irrigate in different hours that may not necessarily be environmental friendly, but that's the way of adapting. If you look at the fact that stores have to close, all farmers have to extend their working hours, that obviously inevitably leads to increased labor costs. So there are ways of adapting, but they come at a cost.
Yeah.
Now, really, we cannot expect government to do everything. I mean, it's impossible. We have to find ways. And you make mention of different commodity sectors. Each commodity is affected in a different way, but we have to find ways looking at technology that's available in the sector, including going back to the basics. Today we talk about wind farming.
Yes.
There are farmers who are already in that space, yes. And the whole issue around coal, it's a bit tricky one at this point in time. But yes, we have to look at alternative energy.
And how does this affect the whole value chain? We talk from farm to fork, and what it actually means. One, in terms of the availability of food and the availability of food choices, particularly.
Food choices, yes. But I think of serious concern is the prices of food. Retailers, because the storage value chain itself is affected. So the produce itself is not the quality that's required. That affects not only your domestic supply, but your export supply as well. Retailers are reluctant to take a produce that's not the quality that they require. At the same time, they experience load shedding that leads to more deterioration. So the availability of food in terms of the choice, but also the fact that the rate of production itself is affected. And that is definitely going to affect food security, which is already a problem in the country. But there's a whole lot of other issues, damage to equipment. The fact that, for instance, if I can make a practical example, electric fences, you know that the sector experiences, one of the threats to the sector is stock theft.
That's right.
If you look at Yes, that's right. And here we're not only looking at livestock. If you look at your game farmers who lose their livestock because of stock theft, that is also another problem. But I think the bottom line, and you've already asked the question, is food security. And the fact that you made mention of this at the beginning of your interview. This is one of the sectors that's very labor intensive. It has shown resilience even during the times of COVID. So definitely there is a need for government to really look at supporting this sector because it is a contributor not only to the GDP, but also in terms of creating real jobs on the ground. Yeah. And of course, ensuring food security.
So you mentioned some of the targets that you will not be able to reach, and these are related, of course, to the agro processing master plan. What is likely going to happen there if, again, government does not heed the call that you're making here around sustainable manner in which we generate our power?
We have to be realistic. We may need to revisit some of the targets that have been set so that there's a clear correlation between what is achievable and the practicality on the ground. But at the same time, there are other pillars, and we refer to them as pillars in the master plan, that may require much more focus. And one of them is a creation of, or rather looking at alternative sources of energy. The reality of the matter is the current challenge requires a multi-pronged strategy, involvement of different role players. Government will not be able to do it alone, but we also have to find creative ways of supporting the most vulnerable. And in cases of this nature, it is the most vulnerable that take the biggest brunt. So how do we, for instance, look at your very, very small farm holder who's involved in chicken farming, the fact that they are not able to slaughter according to schedules because there's no electricity, that leads to a rise in feeding costs because they have to keep the chickens for much longer before they can. Those are the practical impacts because they can't slaughter them. But then you also look at what we experienced during the festive season where there was a shortage of chicken. Some chicken outlets had to close. KFC being one of them, they had to cut down on the number of.
So what are the recommendations then that you are making as far as this alternative forms of energy, but also I believe you're saying there is something that needs to be done, for example, in the current fleet that we have that is generating electricity? In South Africa, we're blessed with research houses that are very innovative, that have come up with innovative ideas. So we need to work together with the research houses to see how, especially farming where there's vast amounts of land that can be utilized, for instance, for wind farming. But there is no running away from the involvement of government when it comes to subsidizing, particularly the small farmers. We cannot run away from that. And I will not talk about the coal issue because it has its own dynamics. But renewable energy is something that we definitely have to look into. We're waiting very patiently from the relevant department to see what statements will be made when it comes to nuclear energy as another source of energy. Yeah. But I think more importantly, really, we need to get ourselves organized as the agricultural sector, big, small, irrespective of race, work together with the government, meet the government halfway to mitigate this challenge. Thandeka, we appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on. Thandeka Mbassa, the CEO of Mbassa, the African Farmers Association of South Africa.